Hi all, this is the MakeHaven badging video for the two bandsaws we have here at MakeHaven. The first one we're going to be looking at is a Laguna bandsaw, 14-inch, and the second one is going to be the Grizzly. So just some general information on bandsaws and what they're for, why you would even think to use it. If we take our example piece of wood, you can use them for ripping, for cross-cutting, and also for resawing. And I think something you can use them for that doesn't easily fall into any one of those categories is doing more curved cuts. So for example, if we wanted to do a curved cut in this piece of wood, or you wanted to cut out this big circle, the bandsaw could be the tool that you might want to use. Some terminology for the bandsaws that'll be helpful for understanding what it's used for is this is the mouth or the jaw of the bandsaw, and then this is the throat. And this one obviously has a really big jaw, and what that means is that you can resaw a really tall board, which is super useful. So if you come in with a log or a thick board and you want to cut it down the middle, if it's 2 inches and you want 2 pieces shy of 1 inch, then you could cut them right down the middle this way. That would be resawing. The Grizzly has a much more shallow mouth, but has a much deeper throat. So you can sort of imagine that that would be better for navigating wider pieces through for doing curvy cuts. So we're going to focus on the Laguna to begin with, just so we sort of get a lay of the land, and then we will get to the Grizzly. So in terms of how the bandsaw works, it's called a bandsaw because the blade is one continuous band. So there's a knob on the top and the bottom that lets us open it up and see inside. And you can see that the blade is in fact one continuous band, and the teeth are cutting downwards. The blade is spinning, and the teeth are cutting down into the table. As opposed to a lot of other saws in the wood shop, it is not kicking towards you or away from you, it's just pulling straight down. So anytime you stop pushing, the blade isn't going to pull the wood. It's not trying to get it to go anywhere. So that makes it actually a fairly safe tool. So that's sort of the general idea. There's a motor on the back that's spinning the bottom one, and then this top one goes around. So we're going to see how to set up the bandsaw, and then we'll get to how to use it after that. So in terms of setting it up, we will take this blade out and then put it right back in. So I'm just going to loosen this knob on the top, and there is a step stool for shorter individuals, like myself. So I'm just going to loosen that, and so what this is doing is taking the top wheel and dropping it down to take the tension off of the blade. And after that, we can take the throat plate, which is this 3D printed blue plate that sits right in the bed. You can remove that, and then the band of the saw comes right out. Before we do that, it's going to be helpful to take this. So this knob is going to release the top guide and let it come down. So we lowered the top guard down, and I grabbed an Allen wrench that we're going to use to take off this yellow cover. As I mentioned before, each of these tools has a somewhat distinct purpose, so you probably won't need to change the blades all that often, but if you do, it is important to know how to do that. So I'm just loosening this, and then this slides right off. And now we can take the yellow guard on the bottom and do the same thing. So the same wrench. It is a 6mm wrench that I'm using. And now the blade can come right out, and it slides through this groove in the table, and the last little bolt we have to remove is this one. Okay. So now that the bandsaw is removed, the blade, we can get a slightly closer look at it. So when we are resawing, which as you mentioned is typically what's going to be done on this saw, or at least least straight cuts, you want a wider blade so that it tracks more straight. If you have a thinner blade, it's able to do thinner cuts, but it won't take such a straight line. It also has relatively few teeth, and they're big gullets in between the teeth. The space between them is big, which means as it's traveling through a thick piece of wood, it can take out a whole bunch of sawdust without the gullets getting full and the blade not cutting. So all that is helpful in resawing and cutting straight lines. So that's why we have this blade in this bandsaw. If we were putting this blade back up on the wall and then grabbing a new one, the way we would fold it so that it's a small circle like it is on the wall is having the teeth facing away. Your foot goes right on top of the blade, and then you turn the blade 360 degrees. So all the way around, and then it coils up nicely. And then you can put it up on the wall. On the wall we have a few other blades. Conveniently, the Grizzly and Laguna are about the same size, so the blades are interchangeable. We're going to put this one right back on, but just so you know, there are other blades that have either more teeth per inch or fewer, deeper gullets, thinner blades, to suit your purpose if you find that that's what you need. When you're reopening the blade, you need to be careful because it has a bunch of force in it, and it can spring open fairly powerfully. So if you feel like you can open it in a controlled way, that's great, like that. If you can't, then you can toss it onto the floor if there's no one nearby. Especially with some of the thicker blades, that can be the best way to do it because it can be dangerous to open it up quickly. Something that's important to keep in mind is when you open it, it's possible to open a blade inside out. And what that would look like is if you opened it like this, and then as the blade comes down, the teeth would be facing the wrong direction. The teeth would be facing up, and so you can see it's just gliding. So it would just burn your wood, it wouldn't cut the wood. So if you see that that's the case, you can just flip your blade inside out to make sure that the teeth are facing down when it's on the right side when it's spinning. So that's very important. All right, so now we have our blade, and we're going to reinstall it into the bandsaw. So we just do the same thing in reverse. It slides through the little crack, and then onto the two wheels. It can be helpful to have two people to install the blade, but it's certainly not impossible to do it on your own. You just get one wheel, and then the next. And once you have it on there, you just need to get it on both wheels and then through the, so on this bandsaw it has wear plates, which are little ceramic blocks that guide where the blade goes. On the Grizzly, it uses bearings, which we'll look at in a minute. So in this case, it's right in there, and the blade is sitting now on the wheels as well as in between the wear plates, so we can reapply some tension. We aren't going to apply all the tension quite yet. Just giving enough so that the blade is kind of straight. And what we're going to do is just spin the blade by hand. So I'm just putting my finger in the top wheel and spinning it. And then I'm looking from the edge of the blade, which is a little hard to see in this bandsaw, and making sure that it's tracking in the middle. And we just put the same blade in that just came out, so it is tracking in the middle, but it's possible that it doesn't. If that's the case, then there's a knob on the back, and we'll look at that more closely on the Grizzly bandsaw. In terms of the tension, for thicker blades you need more tension, for thinner, less. This bandsaw conveniently has a tension meter right on the inside, and so we're just going to put the tension until the indicator is pointing to the middle of the tension meter. What you can do when you're here at the tool is you can feel what that feels like, both in terms of on the knob and when you're actually pushing on the blade. So we're going to move this back up a little bit, and this is about the amount of deflection you want to be able to feel. So it's not totally stiff, but it's certainly not flexing under my finger very easily. So that's the right amount of tension, and we do that once the blade is centered. So the next thing we want to make sure of is that the blade is hitting the wear plates properly. The teeth have what's called set to them. So they alternate side to side so that they're biting out a slightly wider path in the wood, it's called the kerf, than the blade itself. If the wear plates are too far forward, they will crush the kerf in the blade, and then your wood is going to stick on your blade. So it's important to make sure that the wear plates are behind it. And you, again, can adjust those by moving these bolts. We'll look at that more closely on the Grizzly because it is more, it comes into play more on the Grizzly. I'm just going to reinstall these guards, the blade guards that were on there. So the bottom one goes back like so. And this bolt and then last this one. So next we're going to get into actually using the bandsaw and some of the techniques and when you would use it and how exactly you'll use it. And it is very important to have these blade guards on. So in terms of some safety before we get started with actually using the bandsaw, it doesn't have a tendency to kick back or to pull you in like some of the other tools do, so it is a little safer. But you do want to be very careful of anything hanging off your body that could get caught in here and get pulled in. Sleeves, and you do want to keep your fingers outside of the throat plate area if possible. So you want to give the blade a wide berth. So those are some of the main considerations. We're just going to close this right back up. The bandsaws, like all the other tools, are controlled by the badging system, and the vacuums turn on automatically, though that may not be the case if you have a different setup somewhere else. So we don't need to worry about that. When we're cutting the piece, we're just going to start with a rip cut. Say on this piece of wood, we want this upper guide to be just a little bit above our above our workpiece. We don't want it touching, we don't want it limiting the movement, but the closer it is, the more firmly it'll hold the blade in place. If it's too high above, the blade can wobble and won't be held. It'll also expose more of the blade than necessary, which isn't terribly safe. And I can activate the tool with the card, so it uses the bandsaws, and then over here is the Laguna bandsaw switch. So this has just an on-off. So we're turning it on. Bandsaw tends to spin a long time after you turn it off because the wheels are very heavy and they carry a lot of momentum. It's important to stay by the tool while it's spinning down and not to just walk away. It's also very important not to get your fingers near there while it's spinning down. One thing you can do is take the waste piece of wood and push it up against the blade to help slow it down more quickly. Don't be cavalier about that. Keep your hands away. It's still a spinning blade, but if you have a waste piece of wood, you can slow it down like that. So that's one way that you can rip a piece of wood. Cross-cutting, you can either do freehand. There's very little chance of it binding like there is on the table saw, so that is more of a possibility. With this blade though, you're generally going to be doing straight cuts. So if you're doing a cross cut, you can use a miter gauge. The miter gauges are up on the wall. You can also use the one from the table saw if you prefer. They're a universal size. It goes right in the miter gauge groove, and you can push the wood through either at a 90-degree angle, or you can change the angle if you want to put it through at a different angle. So that was ripping and cross-cutting. Now to resawing, which is the primary purpose of this, the way that we do that is, again, we just raise the blade guard up to give ourselves a little clearance. In this case, we're going to need to clear the fence. So it's going to go a little bit above the fence. And there are a few ways of going about this. Blades tend to drift on the bandsaw. They have a tendency, for any number of reasons, to follow a path of their own. If the blade is really sharp and the wood isn't too hard, sometimes you get lucky and it'll just follow the line that you want. So if you have extra wood, you can see if that's the case. So you can just tighten it down to where you want it, line it up with where you want to cut, and have a go for it. If you go really slowly, sometimes you'll get lucky and it will track exactly where you want. However, sometimes you're not so lucky, and there's a tool to help with that. So this is a resawing fence, and the way this works, it has bearings, and the bearings you're going to run the piece of wood against, and it allows for you to work the piece of wood side to side. So what you would do is you would trace a line down your piece of wood of where you want to resaw it, and then you would put the fence so that the distance lines up with that line on your piece of wood, and then there are magnets, same as the feather board on the table saw, that you drop down to attach them to the bed of the bandsaw. So in this case, I would put it down and lock it to the bed, and then what you can do is you follow the line on your piece of wood. So you just track left or right, slowly, obviously, so you don't have a curvy line, and you can achieve a very straight line, all things considered. When you're done, you'll probably pass it through the planer to get a really smooth finish. But if you have a really thick piece of wood and you want it thinner, then this is in general a good way to do it. So I'll just demonstrate with the normal fence, and we can see what kind of result we can achieve. Something I'll mention now is that all the tools with metal beds, we're going to be doing the same thing with in terms of treating the bed, which is applying a paste wax. And the reason we do that is to make sure the wood can slide smoothly. In this case, you can see that the wood is almost floating, which is exactly how we want it. If at any point it isn't behaving that way, it feels sticky, the paste wax is located right up on the wall. You just take a paper towel and buff it in, and then buff off any excess. That'll help prevent rust, and also make sure that your wood slides very smoothly. So I'm just going to bring the fence over, and the motion I'm going to use for this is I'm going to start by pushing into the fence and down into the table, and then I'm going to go through the blade, and then once maybe half of it is through, I'll transition to be on both sides of the blade until my front fingers start to get close to the throat plate, and then I'll transition to the back. And the whole time I'm going to be pushing towards the fence, down into the table, and pulling all the way through. Sometimes, if you have a really big piece of wood, you may want to ask for another person for help to support on the in feed or out feed or both. We also have rollers that you could use if that is appropriate. So I'm going to demonstrate resawing now. In this case, we got a very straight line and a pretty good finish. You saw that it cut pretty quickly too, and all those things are a result of a combination of the blade and the bandsaw. That was convenient, but you saw some of the other techniques we have in case that doesn't work so well. So we're going to move over to the Grizzly at this point to look at how it's different, but that is the general technique with the Laguna bandsaw. So over here with the Grizzly, as I mentioned, it has a much deeper throat, which allows us to do wider curves. It has a thinner blade, and the thinner blade, again, allows us to do curves. You can see it has more teeth per inch and much smaller gullets, and so that allows us to do some finer work. It should leave potentially a smoother cut, and in general be good for the curve purpose. There may be other reasons why you'd want to use one tool or the other, but in general that's the thought. So the primary difference here that we're going to be looking at is how this uses bearings instead of the wear plates that we saw in the Laguna. When we have the bearings, the idea is that they ride just off the edges of the blade, with the thought being that it prevents it from sliding one way or the other. And then the rear bearing prevents the blade from pushing backwards when you're applying force against it. Because if you're pushing your wood and the blade is moving backwards, that is not doing much good for you. So when you're setting it up, again, you're just going to be spinning this. And what you want it to look like is not actually spinning the bearings when it's sitting like this, but maybe just glancing against it. And then when you push your piece against it, that's when it is actually going to touch the bearing. So here it isn't quite adjusted properly. On the bottom, it's the exact same as it looks on the top. So it's just a mirror image. I'm going to show you on the top, but it's just the same on the bottom. The Allen key to adjust it is located right on the front of the tool, so you can just take that out, remember to put it back. You can adjust the whole head by loosening this and moving it forwards and backwards. And then you can adjust each individual wheel here by loosening this, moving it forwards and back, and then these by loosening the bolt on the fronts and sliding them from side to side. One thing we will look at quickly, because we didn't get a good look at it on the Laguna, is aligning the blade. So here you can see it's tracking right in the middle, but if it weren't, what you could do is loosen this nut on the back and then tighten or loosen this bolt. You want to do that with very fine adjustments though, because you'll see that if you do even a half turn, it will take the blade way far off to the side. So you just do very small adjustments and then spin it a few times and see what the result is. And so you can see I've turned it maybe an eighth of a turn and it's already going backwards. So that looks pretty good to me. It's sitting in the middle. The teeth are still right behind, in front of the bearings, and now it's much closer to that rear bearing. So I'm going to lock down the lock nut on the back so it doesn't vibrate into a different position. We can lower this a bit for our workpiece, and now we'll see exactly where it falls. So now if I push backwards on this, well, it still isn't quite touching that bearing, so we're just going to move it forward just a hair. And then these two look good, so they're just on the sides, and they're just back of the teeth. So those are in good positions, and now this bandsaw is ready to use. In terms of changing the blade, it's the exact same procedure, except that you don't need to remove any of the guards using an Allen. So for the Grizzly, it also has a fence. It's located up on the wall. It's the blue one, and the way it works is you can just take it off and put it right on the rail. In general, it's going to be on this side of the blade, but not necessarily. You can also turn it if you want to change its position, if that's more useful to you, and then you just tighten it down in its position. Something else that can be useful when you're using the bandsaws is changing the angle of the bed. It's the same on both of the bandsaws. The way that you do it is you loosen two knobs on the bottom, and then the whole bed can change angle. So that is certainly convenient. What you do want to do when you're done is make sure that it is back at 90 degrees. You don't want it just approximately 90 degrees, because the next person who uses it is going to be very confused. So when you're done, you can grab a square off the wall, which I'll grab right now, and raise the guard up, and then make sure that the table is in fact back to exactly 90 degrees with the blade, just to make sure that the next person, who may well be you, on the bandsaw is not thoroughly frustrated. And of course, when you're done, make sure to vacuum up the tool. The automatic vacuum gets most of it, but there's always going to be a little dust left over, so make sure to just vacuum up the table and anything else that may have fallen on the floor. As always, if you have any questions, make sure to ask the animator when you are getting badged. And then down the road, feel free to ask any other members or on Slack. Thanks for watching.